Now before I put the valve cover back on this this new side, I want to be very generous with the oil all throughout around the bearing caps and on the gears and on the lobes of the camshafts, so get it all good and wet. So here's my driver's side valve cover. I'm going to go ahead and take the valve cover gasket out, the old one that is. Just pulls out of the slot. Looks like it's a little bit crushed, not too bad. And I want to check the slot all the way around, make sure that it's clean. Then I want to take the new gasket and just work it down into the groove all the way around. These gaskets are exactly the same for the passenger and driver's side. Now you remember my semicircular plugs, I want to make sure that those are nice and clean, so rag with some acetone, and also where they go on the cylinder head. Now these semicircular plugs get just a little bead of RTV silicone. And it sets right down into that little groove. Do it in one shot, not to make a mess. Same for the one in the back. There are a few other places we're supposed to apply a little bit of RTV so that the valve cover gasket will seal properly in places where it's prone to leak. One is right up here at this little juncture. Just a little dab right there. Right here. And at the seams where the semicircular plugs go. Likewise, those same spots in the back. Now I can carefully set the cylinder head cover right down into place in one smooth motion. I do want to look real carefully and make sure that the gasket didn't sneak out. So my gasket's in there real good. I install my 8 bolts, and these have my new washers, rubber backed washers from my gasket set. And I'm just going barely finger tight here to start. I want to make sure that we install this in a few passes to compress the gasket down evenly. Now we don't want to overdo this. In fact, these are only supposed to be torqued to 53 inch-pounds. Now that the driver's side is done, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing here on the passenger side. Let's put the exhaust manifold back on, and we're going to use a new gasket here on the crossover pipe. So I chased these threads in the nuts and the studs with a tap and a die so that they're going to screw on and off real easily. There's a light coating of oil on them. Take the new gasket here. Put it on the ports, install this stud with the nut still on it on the front, and I'm going to slide it up in there and hopefully engage these front studs into the crossover pipe around the gasket in the back. I'll thread the front stud in by hand through the hole in the gasket. Now, while ensuring that the gasket is slid up into place, alright, I got the top 3 studs in by hand. I'll just kind of snug them up a little bit before I get down to the bottom ones. The top one's just barely snug. Let's see if we can feel our way down, put the bottom ones in by hand. These get torqued now to 30 foot-pounds. I've got 3 nuts to install now back here on the studs here to secure the crossover pipe to the exhaust manifold. There's the second one on by hand. Boy, it really did make a difference having chased those threads with a die to make sure that they were nice and clean with a little bit of oil on them. They spun right on by hand. I'm going to snug these up good and tight. The heat shield goes back on. Again, I chased these threads just to make the nuts a lot easier to get on. And I replaced this top nut that was all rusty, and I tore it up getting it off, so here's a new one. Now for the alternator bracket. Just 14 foot-pounds on these. Don't forget the little shield. I'm going to put the lower portion of the intake back on now. Get my protective rags out of here. I've got my new gaskets, and they're identical, so they only go on one way. And I've got these surfaces nice and clean before I put these on here. I've got the bottom of this nice and clean. Remember, these bolts were different lengths. The bolts kind of go in a zigzag pattern. The longer ones go on the inner holes, and the shorter ones go on the outer holes. There's a long one, there's a short one. There's also a washer and a nut on each of the 4 corners. And these all get torqued to 13 foot-pounds. Slide this coolant hose back on. Put it back on the intake manifold stay with its 2 bolts. These are also tightened to 13 foot-pounds. And the fuel inlet hose attaches to the fuel rail right there, so we're going to run that back down and around. I'm going to hand tighten this fitting first before I attach the bracket in the back, and it gets a new copper washer on either side of the fitting here. One on the back behind the bolt head, and one between the fitting and the fuel rail. There's that washer. Now I want to make sure I get this started by hand so I don't cross the threads. So there's the fuel inlet hose, nice and tight, and then there's that little bracket or strap and the hole through it where the bolt goes. The fuel pressure regulator comes down. It wants to attach here to the left-hand side of the fuel rail. But before we do so, we need to replace this O-ring. So I'm just going to use this pick to try to get under the O-ring and work it off. There's my new one from my gasket kit. Just compare and make sure that it's the same as the old one and it looks right. Now we want to lubricate this O-ring with a little bit of gasoline, which I have on my finger. We definitely want to make sure that the O-ring slides in smoothly and doesn't roll up and get kinked inside that hole. And we'll just gently push it in. And that went in smoothly, and it rotates. If it rotates gently and easily, we know that the O-ring is in place. Two little bolts. This is the rear timing belt cover. And it's got 6 bolts that hold it on. And just snug them up, not much. And we can put back this camshaft position sensor. So now I want to start putting the wiring harness back into position. So I'm going to reinstall this little wire bracket right here onto the thermostat housing. There's these 2 sensors to reconnect down here. One with the red wire, and the other right here is next to the oil filter. Let's reinstall the dipstick tube now. You can see the hole right down here, just above the oil pan where it goes. And it was pretty grungy. I cleaned up the end of it, but we do need to replace this O-ring. This one is really hard. Hard and crispy. Look at that. Tore it to get it off. Very hard O-ring. On goes a new one. And I want to put a little bit of oil on it so it'll slide in place without rolling up and binding. And I'm going to slide it through here. Gently insert it into the hole down there. And secure it with the bolt. Down here by the driver's side exhaust manifold, I'm going to click the wiring harness, clip it right back onto that anchor post. Likewise back here by the firewall, it's another anchor post right here for this larger portion of the wiring harness. It should slide right down on top of that and clip in place. These plastic tabs on the harness have seen better days, but these bolts with wide washers on them hold them down to the valve cover. Same here on the passenger side. This also slides back on its post. I'm going to plug in the 6 fuel injectors. Plug this back in. So the various sensors get plugged in now. We're on the passenger side. And this is the camshaft position sensor. I'm sorry I'm blocking your view here. I think I'll go ahead and reinstall the spark plugs before it gets much more crowded over here. It's supposed to be 14 foot-pounds. Next we'll install the lower portion of the air intake plenum. So let's remove all these rags. I'm going to pull the old gasket off the bottom of this thing. I'm sure I could have reused that gasket, it looked fine, but since I had one in my gasket kit, I'm going to go ahead and install the new one here. Set it down over those two studs. We have these two nuts, one on the front, one in the back. These are each tightened to 13 foot-pounds. There's that little bolt back there that holds that piece of the wiring harness to the back of the lower plenum. The fuel return line attaches at 2 points here and here. Now this electrical ground goes right here. I'll reattach this up here in a little while after we get the top finished. The vacuum line from the brake booster. Let's plug in the electrical connector to the idle up valve. Remove this old gasket. On goes the new. And on goes the upper part of the intake plenum. Two big bolts. Small bolts. Two nuts. 6 of these are also 13 foot-pounds. Now we got several vacuum hoses to reconnect. There's this little guy down here, right on the back side of the lower plenum. And we got these 3 on top that we previously color coded. Now I can put this little diagnostic data port back on its bracket. This vacuum hose is from the power steering pump. Under the throttle body now we had these three hoses. Slide the hose onto the PCV valve. We have a few more electrical connections to make. There's this plug back here on the VSV to the fuel pressure regulator. This one's to the idle air control. And the throttle position sensor. Back on the driver's side now to reinstall the intake chamber stay that holds up this end of the plenum. It's nice knowing where my fasteners are by keeping them where they go. Hard to lose them and hard to forget which hole which fastener goes in. There's 30 foot-pounds on these. I'm going to loosely reinstall the alternator. The tensioning bracket down here, we don't want it to fall out. There's a washer behind that sliding bracket, and then there'll be a washer that goes on behind the nut. So first I'm going to put this stud through the bottom of the alternator on the tensioner. And slide it in up here at the top. Slide in the main bolt. And install the washer and the nut on the tensioner. Just going to let that sit loose for now until we are ready to tension the belt. There are two electrical connections. Remove the nut and washer. I actually have this electrical connector that goes in the back. I know you can't see it, but trust me, it's back there. And the wire and this strain relief goes in the hole. Let's move on now to the timing belt procedure, and we'll begin that by reinstalling the number 2 idler. That gets torqued to 30 foot-pounds. Let's install the left-hand timing pulley, and you can see that it's stamped here with an L for left. Of course, the bolt, here's the keyway for the knock pin. And we'll go ahead and install this knock pin to start with in the little hole right there. Now we'll align the timing pulley with that knock pin, where the wider flange goes outward, the narrow flange goes inward. And now the bolt. And now we need to torque down that bolt to 81 foot-pounds. And before, remember when we took it off, I used a socket through the spokes of the pulley against one of these back cover bolts to secure that. I'm going to reinstall it with a better method. So I'm installing the largest pins that come with the tool. And just screw them in like so. and the knurled nuts that come with it on the back, I guess to keep them from backing out. I have a tool review video for this pulley holding tool. I'll put a link to that in the description. You might want to check that out. Now take the pins and insert them into the gear like so. Now with the camshaft timing gear held securely now by the tool, I should be able to use my torque wrench and apply the proper 81 foot-pounds to tighten this bolt. Let's give it a try. So I've temporarily installed the right-hand camshaft timing pulley so that I can rotate it and align the timing mark. Otherwise it'd be too hard to turn by hand. Now my timing mark is roughly lined up. Now to start setting the timing properly, we begin by setting cylinder number 1 to top dead center, and we do so by adjusting the main crankshaft pulley up to the 0 mark on the timing cover here, and there's a little notch that we need to align there. So I'm just going to turn it back just a few degrees so that's lined up with the 0 mark. And now it is. So now we're at top dead center on cylinder number 1 as indicated here. That may not look lined up to you, but if you look at it at the proper angle right there, that now is properly aligned with the 0 mark. So now I can remove this gear. I think I'll just leave the nock pin in place. Now for the left hand or driver's side camshaft pulley, I want to adjust the timing mark just a little bit to the left or this side of the timing mark. And that's going to give me some slack in the belt when we go to put the belt on initially. So I'll just rotate this just a hair. There, that's lined up with the timing mark, and I'm going to come maybe another half a tooth beyond that. That'll give me just enough slack in the belt, so make sure we can get that actually on there. Now I can remove these clamps and swing the belt back up in place. These clamps are an attempt to keep the belt engaged in the crankshaft pulley down below. So there's that little mark I made on the lower timing belt cover, as well as the mark on the belt, and they still seem to align, which leads me to believe that it hasn't slipped on the crankshaft pulley below or skipped a tooth. Now we'll certainly double check the timing when we get the belt fully on here to make sure that it's correct, but for now that looks good. And with that, I'm going to route this side of the belt around the water pump pulley, which is right here, and then up and over the left-hand camshaft gear. And we can already see now that we've got an alignment problem that doesn't look right. I'm going to move this over to where we originally had it. That may account for the slack we've got here. Yeah, I think it will. So I'm going to put that mark I put on the belt now with the alignment mark on the camshaft pulley and see how that looks. Now I'll turn the cam gear back counterclockwise to align the timing mark with the timing belt cover and see how we look with the belt tension. So that's now lined up. And what we should have now is tension here between this pulley, the belt, and the crankshaft pulley, and we clearly don't. And I can see from my mark down here on the belt now that we've now slipped a tooth on the crankshaft pulley, so I need to correct that. Now that I'm engaged in the right tooth below, I'm going to go wrap this back around the camshaft pulley. I need to back this off a little bit again to relieve the tension. There we go. Now turn it back to the left and apply some tension. Very good. Now if we look again, the timing mark on the gear is aligned with the mark on the belt with the cover, and I've got tension now at this position between this gear and the gear down on the crankshaft, and that mark is still aligned now with my lower cover. So I know I've got this pulley and this pulley timed accurately and the belt is in the proper position. Now supposedly it's going to be easier if I go ahead and remove the nock pin from the right hand camshaft on the passenger side for this next step. And that is to take the right hand, as marked with an R, pulley, camshaft pulley, and find its timing mark, which is right here, and align the timing mark that I already made on the belt, which is right there, while keeping tension on the belt to keep it from slipping off the crankshaft pulley. I'm going to try and slip it onto this pulley and line up that mark on the belt with the mark on the pulley. There. Now you can see that the mark on the pulley and the mark on the belt are aligned. So now, while maintaining tension on the belt so it doesn't slip off any of the other pulleys, I'm going to push this belt down below the number 2 idler, rotate everything appropriately, keeping tension on the belt, and at the same time I'm going to slide this pulley onto the camshaft. And hopefully I've got enough slack where I can align the nock pin with the hole. I can reinstall the bolt. Now, with the belt installed on the passenger side, we can use the pulley holding tool to torque down this bolt, 81 foot-pounds. Let's look at the timing belt tensioner now.